Okay, so thank you everyone for joining exactly on time. Hardly we see exactly on time. We have so many people. And we have Mr. Kannan Krishnaswamy with us, who has been working in the area of journalism and communication since past more than 35 years. And we can't just be more than, thankful to Kannan, to you, because in spite of having so many challenges and not being able to come to Delhi, so many rescheduling, you were able to share your time with us. And he'll be talking about how how as researchers we could take our work to a larger audience and to have a bigger impact. So we welcome you here, Kannan. Briefly about him. So he has worked as a freelance, he's been working as a freelance journalist, and he has worked earlier as a journalist also, and he's worked with the Hindu, which is a very famous newspaper here in India. And he's worked as communications head at Plan India, Oxfam, and also with the George Institute for Global Health. And that's the place where both of us have worked together as well as colleagues. Kannan has straddled the journalism and media world, as well as he understands the communication needs of the development sector as well as academics. He's a pioneer in adapting the critical appraisal skills for research developed by Oxford University to critically analyze the media and communication industry in the health sector, and launched the Media Doctor pilot in universities and academic institutions in India. So currently, he's a freelancer and he lives with his family in New Delhi. And right now, he's connected with us from Kannur. So welcome,
Thank you, Amanpreet. Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, because Amanpreet, I lost you for a brief second there. So I was wondering whether the problem
yeah,
was
the
from my
IT person were calling. IT people were calling me. So I'm just handing over it to you, Kannan. So over to you. I'll mute myself.
Right. Thank you, Manpreet, for those lovely words of introductions. You've been quite generous in introducing me. I don't know whether I deserve all those things that you mentioned about me. And I'm quite happy to finally get started with this workshop. And we have been planning it, I know, for a long time. And originally, I said that I prefer the offline mode, but circumstances were such that I was not able to be present in Delhi, and so I'm very happy to be here online. As Amanpreet said, I've straddled both the journalism and development worlds, and I've worked in the health sector as well. And therefore, when it comes to communications, there are two aspects of communications that are very critical. One is understanding communications in general, and then how it works in the health sector. What are the specific things in mind that we need to remind ourselves when we talk of communications in the health sector. Now, I have not purposefully attuned it to mental health and psychology and counseling, but then along the way, if we want to have a discussion on that, we can. And the third part of my presentation is about amplifying the research, and then it builds on the base, which is communications, and then the specific challenges in the health sector. So this is how my presentation is going to be structured. So I'll be talking about the basics of communications, writing and storytelling principles, some of which are quite obvious to all of us, but then when we miss the point when we sit down to write or communicate. And after that, I will talk about the critical appraisal skills program. There is a critical appraisal skills program which Oxford University has been running for research for 25 years, and we actually adapted it to look at media and the communications in the health sector, so that evidence-based health communications, we can actually understand what are the foundations of evidence-based health communications. And after that, we will be talking about communicating for impact and techniques to amplify health research. I have not actually, though the topic of my presentation is about how to communicate to the larger masses and how to take your work to the new level. I thought that, the base is very important. So we will build on the base and talk about the techniques to amplify health research. But then, it may require a separate workshop later if we want to go deeper into that. So with that, let me come to the first part of the presentation. So we all know that the simplest model of communications is the sender receiver model. I mean, there is someone who wants to communicate a message, and then there is to someone else, who we call it as an audience. He or she is an audience. Now here, I mean, communications has undergone a lot of change when you start looking at it from different perspectives. If you look at a sender oriented communication, then what you want to say is very important. When you look at receiver oriented communication, then what other people want to hear is very important. And sometimes, I mean, the medium we use to communicate, whether it is, let us say, one to many, like what we are doing now, or one to one, or newspapers and mass media, the social media, everything has its own, own rules and principles. And then the entire messaging revolves around the medium. So much so that, there was a communication expert called Marshall McLuhan. He said that the medium is the message. So what is most important for communications is the medium. Having said that, I think each one is very, very important. The sender must have something to say. I mean, there is a oft quoted principle in communication: have something to say, you will say it. And then, understanding the audience is very important. Understanding the target group, the audience is very important, and that is the receiver. I mean, and then of course we need to distinguish between what exactly is the useful message and what is noise. So that kind of a filtering. I mean, these days when we talk of information overload and all, this becomes very important. Of course, the feedback from the receiver to the sender, that is very important. So this is the simplest model of communication that has stood the test of time. And while so many models of communications have been added, I mean, this is still relevant to this day. Now, this is something I'm sure many of you are aware of, but still is very, very important, because when we look at, how let's say media communication happens, or let's say, how pithy communication that's receiver oriented happens, then we need to look at these 5 Ws in one. In fact, whatever happens in this world, can be, I mean, answered from these 5 questions. What, who, where, when, why, and how. How is missing here, but how is there in the next slide. So in terms of the message content and the audience, when we ask the question what, I mean, we need to keep in mind, as I said, have something to communicate. So what am I required to communicate? And then, do my audience care? I mean, you might have a lot to communicate, but does your audience care? And the audience is different. When you want to communicate to policymakers, it's different. When you want to communicate to corporates, it's different. When you want to communicate to researchers in the peer group, it's difficult. So what is in it for you and the audience? And critically, are you attuning yourself to the requirement of the audience? And then the sources, I mean, what are the sources? Authentic sources are very, very important. Much of misinformation happens because, we rely on sources which are not credible. And that is something that happens all the time through social media. And later when we start looking at, critical appraisal of information, we will realize that, this information or credible source and testing information, that's very, very important. And of course, having a clear message is very important. And in many cases, we want to engage with the audience, right? We are not communicating passively. We want them to do something after listening to us or after reading our article. So what action is the audience required to take as a result of the communication? these are very basic questions, but these are very, very important, when it comes to communication. Next, why? I mean, many times as a journalist, when we wrote stories, I mean, it may be, let's say, I wrote a lot on the development sector, and I covered a lot of NGO work. And one of the first things that I was asked when I was doing a story is, what is the provocation for the story? Why are you doing this now? So uh, the provocation for the story, understanding the trigger, I mean, is there an external trigger? Is there an internal trigger? I mean, are you wanting to communicate something because you want to change the policy environment? Are you wanting to communicate something because you want to raise funds? Why are you communicating? Okay, and why are you communicating now? That's very, very important. And then why this audience? I mean, so it's very, very important that we so all this, asking all these basic questions helps us tune ourselves to actually requirement of the audience, and then filter out all the noise, because as researchers, as people who are working on a particular issue, we are passionate about it and we want to tell everything that we do. But it's not a question of telling everything we do. It's a question of telling what is most important for the audience, because you want the audience, you want them to take some action. Okay, so similarly, the when should you communicate? I mean, we are planning for a youth event in March, and one of the first things that people advised us to do was, do it when the parliament is in session. I mean, do it when something big is happening, so that when question, uh, when do you want to communicate, is very important, especially when we are actually drawing upon the external environment and triggers from the external environment. And many times, it's about the credibility of the person who is communicating. And if a person has built credibility, I mean, again, taking examples from news, I mean, if Narendra Modi is saying something, then the news will revolve around what Narendra Modi is saying. If Narendra Modi is saying something on the 50th anniversary of India's independence from the ramparts of Red Fort, then all this becomes the context, when and where. Okay, so that's where, I mean, you can go through these questions. They're very basic, but they're very, very important. Then who is your audience, and what is the action that you require them to take? Who are the stakeholders? Who will support your idea? And at the end of the day, I mean, are you in control of your message? Are you able to communicate in a very articulate manner what you want to say? That's very important. And how? I mean, choosing the medium to communicate. I mean, it could be a press conference, it could be a press release, it could be, let's say, a workshop like this. So, how are you going to communicate? What are the methods you're going to use to convince the audience? How are you going to handle difficult questions? All these things are important. So the 5 W's and 1 H, they become like the core of all communication that happens. Any brainstorming that you want to do in terms of a messaging starts with the answers to these basic 6 questions. Okay, the other thing that we all miss, and this is something that I want to underscore, is dry communication doesn't work. And that is why all impactful communications starts from storytelling. We all love stories, right? The grandma's fairy tales and Amar Chitra Katha and Panchatantra and all those things. So what is the difference between, let us say, writing a report or storytelling is, in storytelling, you are basically uh, producing a conflict. See, if there's a problem and then there's a solution, the problem is leading to some sort of a difficult situation for a group of people, and then there's an entry of a hero who, I mean, in this case, it could be you people who are doing some research to solve a difficult question, and then that then leads to a solution. So I mean, while it is true that I mean, research papers or let's say reports are written more from a depersonalized point of view. I mean, giving human touch to your communications, and telling stories whenever you can is very important. And in terms of storytelling, there are people often talk of the 4 P's and the 5 C's. So when you talk of 4, people are very important. People are, I mean, research reduces people to statistics, but people are very important. So we call them case studies. But I will say case studies itself is a depersonalized phrase. Okay. I mean, in the journalism world, we call them human interest stories. At the end of the statistics is about people. So, and then of course, as I said, I mean, we are taking a problem and we are trying to actually solve the problem, and therefore, the struggles that we go through in terms of solving the problem. Okay, the various interesting plots and subplots involved in terms of, let us say, cutting through the maze of the various stages of research, which involves, let's say, brainstorming, interactions, working in the field, going and interacting with people. So everywhere, there are people who are entering the picture, and if we are able to bring in those elements into our piece of communications, it becomes very impactful. And that is why, the other thing that we often say is the 5 C's of storytelling, circumstances, conflict, crisis, climax, and conclusion. I mean, in essence, it's about a beginning, a middle which goes through a crisis and a solution, and then a happy ending. I mean, I think there is a very impactful quote in management. They call it the messy middle. Everything looks messy in the middle. You begin, and the beginning is very rosy, ending is always happy. But then how do we communicate the messy middle? Most of the time when we communicate, we leave out the messy middle, because the messy middle involves us. It involves, the difficulties that we pass through. And if you are able to find out a way of actually talk about this, I mean, through blogs, through, let's say, articles, and then of course, talk about the problem and the solution, then it becomes very impactful. Much of the communication that happens in the research world is depersonalized, and that is something that we can actually um, change by taking a storytelling approach. Okay, the second thing, which is a very impactful way of writing, is called the inverted pyramid style of writing. I mean, if you see the news in newspapers, I mean, the first paragraph, I mean, it contains the crux of what happened in that. The 5 W's and 1 H are there in the first paragraph. A workshop was held here today an online workshop was held here today for faculty members of the O.P. Jindal Institute, where, I mean, the basics of critical appraisal and storytelling was familiarized. Or, I mean, I'm just putting it roughly, but then you have answers to all the 5 W's in 1 H. You could begin it very interestingly in a I mean, researchers often, are used to writing dull and drab reports to make it more impactful. A workshop was held here today. But again, in the first para, you bring in the 5 W's and 1 H. And that is the inverted pyramid style of writing. We call it the principle of diminishing importance. I mean, in any style of writing, whether it's news or features, the first paragraph is most important than the second paragraph. The second paragraph is less important than the first paragraph, but more important than the third paragraph, and so on till the end. So you start with the news, and then you give the supporting information. Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can show you here. I mean, a press release here. Are you able to see this?
Kannan, could you please zoom in?
Sure. zoom in, right? So which one here?
The plus button, can you see?
Yeah.
100% is written on the screen, and then there's a
Right.
minus and a plus button.
1 minute. Something is wrong here.
Yeah. So you'll have to click on enable editing and then yes.
Something wrong here. 1 minute.
And at the bottom of your screen, you might be able to see
Let me see.
CT.
Let me do. So this is the full screen, right? Which one? I mean, the first one or the second one?
Can you just go to the bottom?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Is it coming? No.
Yeah. So
Um,
Kannan, you've opened it on slideshow actually. Just go back.
Mhm.
So let's just say, let's open it again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Go back.
So can you see a scroll bar, on the right side towards the end, 100% is written. So you need to move it towards 100%.
Okay.
Yes. I
Is
think this
this
would be visible to everybody.
okay? So this is a recent press release I did on Fitterfly, which is a technological platform for helping diabetics. I mean, reverse their condition. And the context was, they bagged venture capital recently at 12 million US dollars, and it was led by Amazon Sambhav Ventures. So I mean, if you look at the headline, it just says it all. Okay. Fit of Life backs 12 million US dollars in Series A funding round led by Amazon Sambhav Ventures and Fireside Ventures. And the fund will be used in the fight against diabetes and chronic disease. Now, let's say if we were to talk about this in a report, we would not begin like this. We would first talk about the context. I mean, usually in the report, we will talk about how, diabetes, India is a diabetes capital of India, talk about the statistics around diabetes, and then, how, we are trying to, come up with several innovative ways to fight diabetes, and then say that, digital therapeutics is a field which could be used to do this. And then we bring in a team of psychologists and nutritionists and physiotherapists to actually tackle this problem. But when we write a press release, it's bang on. What is it? And it's a very very interesting form of writing, because there you don't beat around the bush. You just straight come to the point. And the more we actually adopt this style of writing, the more pithy our communication becomes, and much of, let us say, communicating our thoughts and ideas becomes easy when we start adopting the inverted pyramid style of writing. Amanpreet, I was not able to include an activity. That's why I thought let's review a press release.
Sure.
Or if there are some questions here, I may take, because this is a very important thing that I want to mention. I mean, it is very different from the usual style of writing that we follow.
Sure.
If everybody is following, it's fine. I can go to the next slide.
Yeah, we can just request, anyone and everyone, whoever has questions, please unmute yourself and you can freely ask the question.
Right.
I
For
think we do not
example,
have questions.
Amanpreet,
Kannan, we can go ahead.
if I may, ask a couple of people here, to talk about their work. Okay. In the inverted pyramid style, where they answer the 5 W's and 1 H. So that would be quite interesting, I feel. So if there are a couple of volunteers who could talk about their work in just, let's say, 3 or 4 sentences, where you are able to answer all the 5 W's and 1 H, including the how and the why part, which is very crucial. And sometimes the how and why part can go into pages.
Yeah.
But is that something that I can ask the participants here, can someone try?
Okay, I will try then.
Okay,
I'll be the volunteer.
sure, sure.
So we have to do what, who, when, why, and how.
Yes, I mean, any piece of work that you're doing, which is very
Yeah.
interesting.
I'll just quickly take anything. So I'll just take. Um, okay. So to address the burnout and compassion fatigue amongst the health professionals, we had conducted a mindfulness integrated cognitive behavioral intervention program from the month of June 2017 till the very following year, September 2018. And it was observed that the 6-week program was able to, reduce their burnout, reduce their compassion fatigue, and increase the satisfaction levels.
Right. That's a good try, Manpreet. Only thing is you
Thank you.
repeated yourself at the end. Well, in the beginning also you said the same. But that, I think that's a good try. And of course, see, now when you I mean, are able to write an intro, and you're able to bring all the 5 dips in one, and then the entire report has to now follow the structure of the intro. You're saying addressing the burnout and fatigue among health professionals. Okay. Now, point is, I mean, it will follow saying what is the burnout and fatigue among health professionals, have some data and statistics on that in the next paragraph. And then you will talk about, okay, how mindfulness is coming as a solution. And then what you did, you can bring in a quote of one or two participants, which says that, it was very interesting. And then finally, you could end by talking of how mindfulness has been playing a role in terms of addressing the fatigue. So basically what happens is when you are writing the first paragraph, that in fact, uh, it's like a hanger on which you are hanging the entire writing. So in a way, we say in journalism, take care of the intro, the story will take care of itself. And the intro is so important and critical that what you write in the intro, in those 50 to 60 words, I mean, the entire article, I mean, whether it's a news release or a report, and then we can then, I mean, you follow the structure of a news release. It could be dovetailed to follow a structure of a, I mean, you could say that mindfulness is playing a very important role in addressing fatigue uh, among health professionals, and then say, take it off from there if you don't want to peg it on a workshop that was held here today, right? But then what you say in the first paragraph becomes very, very critical. That's what I'm trying to say. Can we have one more one? Sorry, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on maybe a comment. Amanpreet had a good try. So I just wanted to say that, like even in research, particularly the abstract, which is around say 250 to 300 words, wherein you have to address all of these questions and give a very succinct understanding of your project. And that's the one that can hold an interest uh, of the reviewers, or whether you are submitting it to a conference. So in 250 words, also in our area, also we have to write something that tells you about all the 5 Ws that we are talking about. So it is a challenging aspect, but it is one of the most important part that we have to do in research as well.
I agree. In fact, the second part of my presentation, I'll be talking more about this. I mean, but you're right. I mean, you could say that, your research is as good as your abstract. Your research paper is as good as your abstract. If you write a good abstract, probably, you will write a good research paper, or you've already written a good research paper. That's why you are able to write a good abstract. Basically, the thought process is clear.
Yeah.
And you're hanging the entire thing on the thought process, and not on structured or stitched kind of things, basically.
Yeah, and like you said, the clarity with which the abstract is written, the same clarity can be translated into the entire paper, or if you've written so clearly the entire project, the same clarity comes in when you actually clean and write your abstract. So each can influence the other.
Right, right. But that mindfulness thing is very interesting, Amanpreet. You could write a op-ed piece or a thought leadership article on that.
I've written it already, Kannan.
Oh, you already written it. Okay, you were 10 steps ahead. That's okay.
No, no.
Shall we go to the next? Okay, so I thought this is important for this group. So I think many of us know this, but then I'll just run through it. So when it comes to report, we start with an objective and purpose. We will collect facts, data, and quotes, and then this is very, very important. As you said in the research paper, you start with an abstract. You start with an executive summary, and then follow a structure. I mean, I think all of you do this. So this is something that is very basic. But what is important is having focus in the report. Many times, I mean, when I have seen a large number of reports which I mean, the beginning is something, the middle is something else, and the end is something else. This essentially happens because we are not able to distill out the unimportant facts, the noise. We think that everything is important, and that is why having a focus. I mean, and that is why it is very, very important to write 3 sentences or 4 sentences about what you want to write, the lead, and then unpack that into, let's say, 600-word article or a 10-page report or 20-page report. That focus is very, very critical. And of course, whom we are writing for is very, very important. If you are writing for, let's say, the corporate audience, the writing will be different. If you're writing for researchers, the writing will be different. So all these things, I mean, the audience is very, very important. Okay. And of course, I mean, if there are several sides to a story, I mean, we need to bring in all the arguments. And when we are writing a good report, I mean, having good headings and subheadings and bolding things where it is required, using bullet points, all these things are very, very important. So I will not go through this much because we have already, but in this very important, and many of the researchers I've seen, I don't see missing this point. Using active voice wherever possible. But active voice is always intending an action. So instead of saying that, I mean, this research was done by so and so, you straight away say so and so did that research. It seems so basic and obvious, but when you take a report and start looking at, how much of active voice has been used and how much of passive voice has been used, you'll be shocked to see that, I mean, we use more of passive voice and less of active voice. And of course, these days, highlighting the report using infographics, pie charts, graphs, they have all become very important. So general tips to improve communications, listening is very important. Thinking before you speak or write, knowing your target audience, and I think we have talked about it. Prepare. I mean, there is an interesting story about Mark Twain. Somebody approached Mark Twain and asked him whether he can come and speak at a conference. So Mark Twain asked him, when do you want me to speak? So, I mean, this guy was surprised because Mark Twain was known to be a very good orator. And then this question, when do you want me to speak? So he asked him, you are a very good orator. If I call you now, you'll be able to speak. If I call you a year later, you'll be able to speak. So what's the big deal? Why are you asking this question? He says, if you want me to speak now, then so if you want me to speak after a year, then I need to prepare myself. If you want to speak now, I can come immediately. And if you want me to speak 3 months later, then I will need about 2 months time to prepare. So preparing is very, very important, and many times, in the research world, what happens is we rehash the same old reports, the same old PowerPoints. We don't write originally, and writing originally is very, very important. Be clear and direct in your messaging, asking for feedback, and having confidence and clarity in your messaging is very important. So this is the first part of my presentation, where the essential thing I'm talking about is taking a storytelling approach. I mean, wherever possible, I mean, we need to illuminate the statistics with a story. And the story has to be woven into the fabric of a report. It is not, it is, I mean, if you have seen WHO reports or UNICEF reports, they make it very interesting, because most of the people have now started following the inverted pyramid style of writing, where, I mean, where they involve journalists and communicators in writing reports, and then the entire report is planned in such a manner that there is no dull or draft sentence anywhere. I mean, whether you're talking of, let us say, the background information, or the methodology, or let's say, the intervention or the recommendations. I mean, try and make it as interesting as possible. Have boxes where you can highlight the human interest elements. I mean, if you say that the mindfulness workshop has helped the participants, then you have a box there about a, a person who talks about how it was helped, or have a story on that person, him or her, about how that person was having a lot of fatigue earlier, but then after the workshop the person has been able to now incorporate mindfulness. And illuminating your reports, illuminating whatever you write with these human interest elements wherever it is possible. And it is not a patching work, mind you. That's the most important thing. It has to be woven into the fabric of the report in a very, very, very nice manner. So that is one, the storytelling approach and the inverted pyramid style. Because essentially, when we start communicating to the outside world, whether we are writing a press release, whether we are writing a blog, whether we are writing an op-ed piece, we need to follow this inverted pyramid style of writing and take a storytelling approach. Any questions?
Kanan, I'll have a question. My question is that, when we say, you're saying that inverted pyramid style is nowadays quite popular and people are following it, but isn't it too straightforward? I mean, within first three lines, you're just done with it. And I mean, it's good for a press release, but what about, let's say, you want to write a story, or you just want to move your research in the form of a story, then do you think inverted pyramid style would be a way to go for it? Because wouldn't it be too dry? I mean, three, four lines, you're just saying, yeah, what, when, wow, this happened, and that's it.
No, I think the point is not that in an inverted pyramid style doesn't mean you write in 3-4 lines. An inverted pyramid style is something that has become popular uh, because of the media. Okay, just can you just hold on for a second? I'll just stop this mobile. This is disturbing me. So essentially, it's a form of writing which has been popularized by the media. But look at, let us say, the reports by international agencies like WHO. Executive summary is the lead, basically. If you see, I mean, the one paragraph that you find in a media article is written in, let's say, 500-600 words. Similarly, abstract is a summary. So it actually, you follow that structure, basically. I mean, then you give the background information, which is the introduction. Okay, and then you come to the body, and the body is okay, what was the problem and how you try to solve the problem. And there you bring in quotes, you bring in statistics, you bring in human interest stories. So what you are doing is, a 300-word article becomes a 3,000-page report. And now we are not talking of, let us say, a simplistic form of writing. We are talking of a structure, basically, a structure which brings in facts, which brings in quotes, and which essentially does not take the audience for granted, or actually considers that the audience is more intelligent than you. And therefore, I mean, instead of Instead of waiting for, let us say, pages and pages before telling the audience what you did, you tell the audience what you want to say at the first instance, and then build interest in the audience in such a manner the audience is forced to read your report or read your research paper. So it's a structure, if you ask me, inverted pyramid.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question from Kirti.
Actually, it's a very basic question in addition to what Dr. Manpreet also asked. So even I'm confused when you're talking about the inverted pyramid and what, when, and why, starting off your article with what, when, and why. I was thinking, isn't it you are not actually stating the problem first or the context first, and you are directly maybe laying down the what whys. I don't know whether it can work with all kind of articles, or do they work in certain types of uh, articles, maybe in a media piece or something like that, or is it like, can we generalize the same pattern to different types of articles, whether it's a research article, a short review, or something else? So that was my.
Right. No, that's a good question. So even in the media world, we have different styles of writing. We have news, we have features, we have opinion pieces, we have we have editorial pieces. So each one does not follow the same style of writing, but essentially it's about, mm, placing your audience. The audience is king here. Okay. Now, let's say, what is the purpose of any communication? You want to actually the person to understand what you are wanting to say and take an action, right? Now, the sooner you are able to come to the point, the better it is. Now, how do you do it? That's up to you. In an inverted pyramid is one way of writing. But then if you think that I mean, whether it is a, let's say, a government a policy person, or whether it is a corporate person whom you want to raise funds, or whether it is even all the peer group, everybody will say in the mind, come to the point, don't beat around the bush. So the essential principle is come to the point, don't beat around the bush. And how do you come to the point? You can come to the point only when, let us say, you take a perspective that your audience is smarter than you. I mean, if let us say you think that the problem is so important, and that my audience should know everything about the problem, it also takes a perspective, says that my audience doesn't know anything about the problem, and so let me communicate everything about the problem.
Right.
Now, is that the right way? Is that correct perspective? And at the end of the day, if you want the policy person to support you, if you want the corporate person to give you funds, even the peer community, if you want them to actually understand what you're doing, I mean, coming straight to the point is very important. That is why, you have structures now where you have the executive summary first. I mean, you are structuring it in such a way that you have executive summary, and then you talk about the problem, you talk about the methodology, you talk about the intervention, and you talk about the recommendations. Now, anyone who's interested, a person like me, I will read the executive summary, I'll straight go to the recommendations, because I know that my news is there in the recommendations. So if I have to write a press release, I have to write an article, I'll go to the recommendation. Let's say, if you want to write something about the problem, I'll mark certain things which are very critical and important. And then probably, if let us say it needs to be supplemented by more data, more human interest stories, I'll research for it. And then let's say build a story on the problem. So it's possible. It's possible to actually unpack and build around the problem or around the intervention. But if you're able to follow some general principles, so if you ask me, the inverted pyramid is not a style of writing. It's not a simplistic way of writing. It follows certain general principles. The first principle is the audience is king. Okay. The second principle is don't beat around the bush, come straight to the point. And the third principle is, tell upfront, why you want the other person, why should the other person care? That's all. As simple as that. Now, if if you are wanting to, if you write everything about the problem, but you're not answering these three critical questions, then you have missed the entire point.
Yeah, actually makes sense. I think there's one more question.
Hi, it's really more of a comment if I can just kind of follow on real quick. I agree with everything you just said, and Kirti, just to kind of follow up, I think it's conciseness, clarity. It does depend upon where you're publishing, right? Some a peer review article is obviously going to be much more technical than if you're doing a book review or perhaps a popular journal. But what my PI in graduate school used to always beat me over the head with is, as academics and psychologists, we avoid flowery language. And what do you mean by that? Unneeded adjectives, adverbs, saying something in 3 sentences that you could easily say in 1 sentence. And for me, that was a real challenge. It took a long time before I got good at writing. So again, I agree with everything that Kannan just said. But to me, that's the essence of it, is you want to be able to, again, say what you mean and say it concisely, and to try to rid yourself of all that other stuff, right? I used to start every other sentence with a, conversely, in addition, moreover, and again, it took years for him to keep coming back and batting me over the head and saying, why do you keep including these words? So again, it's a skill like any other, but I think as psychologists, as scientists, as academics, that's ultimately the direction we're trying to move towards.
But thanks, Derek. I think that's an important point. Unnecessary adjectives, flowery language should be avoided. And many times, we use flowery language because, we want to pad up, right? We have nothing to say there, or our research is incomplete, or, what we want to say, we have not backed it with substantiated with data or statistics or human interest stories, and as a result, we end up padding the entire. We call it padding, and unnecessary padding should not be done. I think what would have been useful is some exercises, but probably we can do it if this interests and if we are able to do a follow-up workshop later.
Sure, Kannan. Yeah.
Sure. So shall I go to this next part of my presentation?
Please, please, please.
Okay. Before that, one of the things that is always challenging is information gathering. In any field, we find it very difficult to collect information and then decide which information to use and which information should not be used. Apart from the fact that data and human interest stories are very important, one thing that I have learned from the research world, and that is what I'm going to present now, is information should be critically appraised. And this critical appraisal program that the Oxford University runs, it just says that there are only 3 principles of critical appraisal. Is the information trustworthy? Same is the research paper trustworthy? Is the piece of communication trustworthy? Is the media release trustworthy? Meaning, does it come from a credible source? Okay. Now, is it valuable? In the sense that, in your context, the methodology that was being used, and let us say the results that have come, does it take the science forward? Very important and very critical. And this is true for every piece of information. Is it valuable? And is it evidence-based? In this context of valuableness is what evidence-based, the term evidence-based comes, and that is something, again, I owe it to the researchers. I also picked it up from the researchers and realized how important evidence-based communication is for health communications. And then bringing it back to communications, bringing it back to journalism is what I did. So it's like a two-way street. Researchers are using are generating evidence and furthering the science, but the science that they are furthering itself could be critically appraised using certain principles, and that then is brought forth to the communications and journalism world, and then the communication becomes evidence based. and of course, relevance. This is again, I think it's a very important term for you people, that research is done in a context. The methodology used varies, and so it may not be relevant in all contexts. A research done locally, is it relevant uh, in other cities in India? Is it relevant globally? What was the methodology used? What was the conclusion? How the results presented? Everything becomes important there. So this is something that I would be talking about in the next part of my presentation. I'm be spending a little more time on that, because once we are familiar with the basics of communications, and we understand that evidence-based health communications is very important. That is what is missing in today's world. You people are struggling to bring evidence-based communications to the world. You will do something very, very important, critical, and will be shocked to actually find media articles which are not based on evidence. And then you start asking, what do I do? So in order to bridge this gap, the researchers have to become communicators, and communicators have to become researchers. And this is what the critical appraisal skills program does. And the more we are able to actually incorporate that in both research as well as in communications, the better our communication becomes. And so understanding the basics of communication, understanding the basics of critical appraisal, and then we can run with any piece of communication. So now,
Kannan, I think we have a comment from Kanika, who said that she really liked the 3 lies which were mentioned on the previous slide.
Okay. I also like that statement very well. So, see, as I said, data is important. Human interest stories are very important. But we also know that, in the context of data, statistics don't present the entire picture. Okay, many times statistics can mislead, and that is why Benjamin Disraeli, who was a former, Prime Minister of UK, long back in the 1900s, in the 20th century, he said there are 3 lies: damn lies, and statistics. And in fact, when in journalism we talk of the golden quote, sometimes we are able to summarize an entire piece of work in a very bright 10 word or 15 word quote. And when a person is speaking in a flow, those statements come. And as journalists, we are tuned to actually pick those quotes and then use those quotes, because those quotes are like, a beacon of light which will throw which will illuminate an entire body of work. And so, having the right data, having the right human interest stories, ensuring that the statistics don't override the human element of what you are trying to communicate, and having powerful quotes that automatically provoke discussion and debate. And if you are writing the entire thing after having critically appraised the information, you can never fail. Every article, every piece of communication that you do would be, lapped up immediately. And there are a lot of writers, who do this automatically. I'm sure, among your group, there'll be a lot of people who are doing this automatically. But then, reflecting on it helps us move forward. Okay. Now, here's a slide that I use very often, and it's a very famous graphic. So if I may ask you, what do you understand by this? It says today's random medical news.
I think it talks about the. Yeah, Sindhura, please go ahead.
I just understand from the picture that coffee can cause depression in twins. I don't know.
Okay. Right.
I think it may have roots in causation versus correlation, what we teach in statistics also. that the two variables, even if they might be a study, but the way it is reported, and so it is understood that this particular variable can cause this particular thing, and this particular thing can affect in such a way. So the audience will understand that this is the causal factor. These two variables are connected with that causality wala factor rather than relationship.
Okay. For me, the impression is that study was really confusing, or whoever wrote this cartoonistic characteristic could not understand, because there's coffee, but the second clock angle is in between depression and glaucoma, then children and twins. So I was really trying to see, where do I fit the relationship? So I will either feel the study findings were too confused, or this person could not get any sense of what he read.
Okay. Anyone else?
Okay, so one person is saying that it's a very confusing image and lacks clarity.
Correct. And that is how medical news is found in newspapers. Anything, it's like, you don't understand how science is produced. And you can combine anything in the first circle with anything in the second circle and anything in the third circle. And if you start, you pick up any newspaper over the past 1 month, and then you just read the headlines, you will realize that you actually end up with more confusion, because the news is very random. And why is the news random? The news is random because it just bases itself on a report. It doesn't go deep into it in terms of, let us say, how was the research done, what was the stage of the research. And so can any of the headlines, that you just spoke about a headline, Sindhura, you were creative to create a headline. Now, is that headline backed by sound research? I mean, here it's just a funny take on the kind of news that you read in newspapers. I mean, you say that having tea can cause cancer, and then same thing, one more research, having tea can actually cure cancer. And which one do you take? And then you go deep down and they say that 100 people were asked to drink tea, and observation was done, and out of that 50 people reported better symptoms, and therefore 1 in 2 people can cure themselves from cancer after drinking tea. And that's a headline which comes. So it's a witty take on how medical news is very random in today's world, because journalists don't understand how science is produced. Journalists don't understand evidence. Communicators don't understand science and evidence. And that's a pathetic state, because, there is a lot of good research happening. But then, at the end of the day, this is what a reader feels after going through medical news. Also because medical news surrounds the reader from all directions, newspapers, television, radio, social media, WhatsApp, everything. And at the end of the day, there could be a in-depth report in a newspaper, but then in WhatsApp, all kinds of combination news. It's basically a combination news. You could be creative to create that combination. So a person ends up, you people, when you read the newspapers, you will end up becoming confused. And this is how, this confusion has been portrayed by this artist here. Okay. So,
Kannan, we have a question. We have a question by Manjushri, who's asking, I understand that powerful quotes complements the critical appraisal, but can powerful quotes overshadow the critical appraisal? When does that happen?
Can you come again with the question?
Sure. The question is, I understand that powerful quotes complements the critical appraisal, but can powerful quotes overshadow the critical appraisal? When does that happen? Maybe I can ask Professor Manjushri to,
No, I get that question. I get that question. There is a interesting book which was written, which is I think it's called Questioning the Expert, basically, I think. And there, the essential argument was there is nothing called expertise. I mean, till the time, you are able to critically appraise any piece of research, any expert comment or any expert article by following the principles of critical appraisal. I mean, you should not be satisfied with any level of expertise. There are experts, who know their field. They are able to actually talk about what they do, and then they can actually come up with a lot of golden quotes. They can give you a lot of golden quotes. But then, I mean, if you really want a good communication to happen, you need to test that against the yardstick of critical appraisal. So I mean, is it what you were intending to ask?
Actually, yes, because I find a lot of, whether you're writing a media article or actually a report, sometimes, when you want to maximize on the impact and give the maximum clarity, people do use a lot of quotes. And I remember one of my supervisors actually mentioned to me that if you are in doubt, take out.
If you're in doubt, cut it out.
Yeah. So basically that, because sometimes we love the quotes more than the content. And sometimes people actually go overboard on quotes as well. So, while you are talking about being judicious about using them, but sometimes, people, they can get really emotional about the quotes that they have come up with. So they don't want to let go. Sometimes I found that while I'm reviewing something, or I have myself done that as well. So it's kind of a challenging thing to balance the content with a right quote and the best quote that goes with it. And it goes on, like with experience, people become better, I guess. So I just wanted to ask, because this is something that we all struggle with in different forms of writing.
No, I think you are right. See, so a quote is like an icing on the cake, where a critical appraisal or the structure that you follow is the cake itself. Okay. And many times we love the icing more than the cake itself. And if you don't have a good icing, then, I mean, take the coffee and ice cream. A good ice cream adds to the coffee. So as you say, you get better over a period of time, and the quote has to gel with the overall fabric of the article. That's very critical. But I was thinking that you were also asking from the point of view of, let's say, generally quotes we use when it comes from experts, right? And in India especially, we say don't question the expert.
Yeah, and sometimes we do, like, say, for example, it's a research article and I'm writing a media piece and I want to use one of my participants' voice. So, and I'm using, so a narrative approach, I'm using that narrative to actually state. So maybe I love the narrative, I love it, but the fact is that it might not be explaining everything about that research. And people I know that I struggled with it. So it's a lovely quote, but it has to have a context within which that I have to state. So may not be always expert, but it could be from one of your participants. That quote actually was quite a good quote and you wanted to use that.
Right, as you said, if it's a very good quote, but it does not gel well in the context, then that quote should be just scrapped. So a concept of a golden quote is not a flowery quote. I mean, we just talked about it earlier. It's something that gels with the context. It's something that actually illuminates the entire thing that we are talking about.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So, as I said, critical appraisal is a process of carefully and systematically examining research to judge its trustworthiness and its value and relevance in a particular context. So, in terms of the research paper,
Kannan, we have a question. I think we have a question by Prama. Prama, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the critical appraisal content. So my question comes from a very different perspective. You were talking about the power of story, the power of the human face when you're talking about the research, right? I'm a qualitative researcher and I love writing in first person even when I'm writing for a journal article. And many a time that is frowned upon in scientific world, right? Because qualitative researchers are often identified as the storytellers, the kahaniwala researcher, and the scientificity of the research is often questioned. Just before this slide, where you were talking about the trustworthiness. The trustworthiness of the data is often questioned by the positive worldview of research. So, what is your take on that?
You are not clear, can someone repeat this question for me?
Being a qualitative researcher, we very often rely on the lived experience of the participants.
Right.
And we talk about the stories aspect. Those are the data for us, right? And the positivist research paradigm, which is not something that the qualitative researchers follow, we are often questioning the trustworthiness of qualitative research data.
Right.
So what is your take on that?
My take on the how we use the qualitative research, the voices that come from the field.
One second. So,
Can you put that question in the chat?
sure, I will. I think so you carry on. I will just put the question in the chat and
Okay. Sure. So let's continue and then we'll come back to that question. So I think, one thing that I will say here, that critical appraisal is a term that has been used in the research world. Okay. And I was one of the few, I am one of the few people who have explored its potential and possibility in journalism and communications. And that is why, sometimes I like to say that evidence-based health communications cannot happen without critical appraisal. And when we talk before talking of critical appraisal of media stories, we need to understand, how this program that I was part of, the critical appraisal skills program, how it came up with a simple checklist for researchers themselves to evaluate research papers. Usually done to journal clubs, and I'm sure it's happening in all institutions where research is being done in its own way. But I'm just talking about particular methodology that was followed in Oxford University. Now, so they have produced appraisal checklists for all methods of research, whether it is a randomized control trial, or whether it's an observation study, or whether it is a cohort study. So they have produced checklists, essentially 10 questions, which can help you make sense of the research paper. And this is for a lay audience. A person like me who is not trained in research can use these 10 questions to make sense of the research paper and then come to conclusions myself about the validity of the question. The first thing the research hinges on is the question itself. So the validity of the questions. Now, results. Now, the methodology that was used and how, the results have been reported, the statistical part. I need not be a statistician to understand how the results have been reported. And this program follows a group methodology where you draw upon the skills of researchers sitting in the field to actually talk about statistical significance does not equal clinical significance, or let's say, what does it mean if the p-value is less than 1? What it means if p-value is greater than 1? Now, I don't understand it. But then, we still as researchers and communicators can sit together in a group to actually talk about a research paper and then understand finally its relevance in a particular context. Essentially, when CASP started, it started for researchers and by researchers, and over a period of time, they involved the other stakeholders in research, including the policymakers, journalists, and others, and they train people across the globe in terms of using the CASP methodology. So I don't know how many of you have seen the, 1 minute. Okay, it's already there. So the website is www.casp-uk.net, and this is how their homepage look like, and they have a lot of checklists there. Now, what essentially was done in a pilot called the Media Doctor pilot, and this was done in Australia. I claim no credit for having invented it, but then this went into limbo after it was tried out in 2013, and I revived it when I was working at the job, is to develop a similar checklist to evaluate media stories to start with, and then to actually evaluate communication pieces, whether it is press releases, whether it is articles, and whether it is, let us say, opinion pieces, and then slowly, any piece of communication, any piece of information could be evaluated using some of these principles. Now, this is the criteria which was used for news on research. I mean, I think it's wrong here. It's not public health news. It's basically news on research. Now, the questions are very simple, very basic, but once you start using it to evaluate media articles, you will realize that media articles fall into a certain pattern, and there are certain flaws in media articles which we will look at subsequently. But the criteria is very simple. Is the research new? Is the public health intervention new? Okay. Is the information new? So what we did was we took a checklist which was adapted for news on research to actually look at news on health research, news on health information, public health news, and policy news. And then the questions are almost same. You can actually tweak the questions and apply to these 4 kinds of health stories, and then any issue, whether we also developed a checklist for road safety. We were in a process of developing one on mental health, but then the project did not come through. So now the 10-point criteria. Is the research really new? I will just use the word research because it was first developed for research. Is the research really new? Okay, or is the treatment really new? Is the new medicine that has been developed really new? Now, is it commonly available? Okay. Now, are there options to it? I mean, many times, media reports on, let's say, a new operation, a new type of stent, a new type of surgery, essentially, by doctors, in private hospitals who do something, and then, they hold a press conference, but the price may be very high. The same thing, and Dr. Balram Bhargav, when he was in AIMS, told me that the stents that they use before the government brought down the price, current government brought down the price of stents, was 1/10 of the cost of stents that are there in private hospitals. So there are alternate options available, but then when media reporting happens, without questioning, the press release or the press conference or the piece of communication that is resulting from the institution which is doing the communication. In the context of COVID-19, earlier in Ebola, we saw media creating a lot of public scare. This is called disease mongering. I'm sure all of you are aware of it. Okay. And we don't talk about, you know, how many people have got it in a population of how many. Okay. And then what are the ways by which it spreads, so that, you know, we are able to actually talk more about prevention rather than creating the scare. A media report would say that, you know, 10 people die of, let's say, COVID of 19. But then, I mean, it's not to belittle the deaths, but then in a country's a size of India, you know, 10 people dying is important. You know, every person dying is important, but the headline could be different. You know, the headline could be based on, let's say, you know, what is leading to these deaths and can they be prevented. So sensationalism often results in the kind of headlines where, you know, we just create disease mongering, public scare, and many times, you know, we don't have evidence supporting the intervention. I can, tell you from the journalism that many times journalists say according to a report, and for them, a 2016 report and a 2021 report is one and the same. Okay. But data changes, you know. I mean, in many cases, you know, we need to have the most recent data. So, I mean, even researchers I have seen, you know, drawing upon old data without actually debating, you know, which data should be used. Should this data be used? I mean, should we be updating our data? Whatever data we get, we lay our hands on, we use it. I mean, is that correct? Is that approach correct? And then the science of the intervention, the science of the treatment is not explained. Many times, you know, it's not based on science. I mean, journalists don't understand research, don't understand that the research is not created equal. Okay. And so for an observational study, I mean, I didn't understand till the time I worked in a public health research institute that the golden standard of research is a randomized controlled trial, and then there are several ways to do it. There's a double-blind thing where, you know, both the study participants as well as, you know, the people who are studying it all can be blinded, or some can be blinded, and there's a control group, there is a intervention group, things like that. I mean, communicators don't understand this. And as a result, you know, much of what gets reported is how you saw in the first slide. I mean, benefits, you talk about benefits for particular medicine, but you don't talk about the harms it can cause. I mean, costs, you don't talk of the costs. Now, the ninth point, consulting with independent expert sources. It doesn't happen most of the time. A good article, you know, it will talk about the research, but then they will ask someone who is an expert, what do you think of this research? And that expert will put the entire thing in context, saying that, you know, it's a good thing that this has been done, and it takes the science further this way. Okay. And that then, you know, puts the entire story in context. Doesn't happen. Went beyond any available media release. Most of the media pieces are copies of media releases, and therefore they're as good as the media release that is written. And as unfortunately, the media releases suffer from the same problem, because the public relations people, the communications people who are writing it do not have training in critical appraisal, and as a result, you know, they end up either exaggerating information, exaggerating research, or they are just, you know, there to put the best foot forward for the organization, right? And as a result, they end up using flowery language, or let's say, you know, exaggerating things. I mean, you see any you pick up any year reporting Times of India, you know, the oral insulin stories. And every year you have a story on oral insulin. And in the past few years, you know, that the drug has been in the first stage of clinical trials. I mean, it is going to be a long time before you see the light of day. But then you will have big 3-column, 4-column stories. Media releases that I issued, you know, they lack the grounding in critical appraisal. And as a result, the health communication is scary. I mean, to use the word, I mean, it's the least that you can say. It's scary there. So what can we do as researchers, as communicators? I mean, as a communicator, I need to understand that, good research is based on all these things that I'm talking about. The same, I mean, the same thing that's being used to evaluate a research paper is now being used to evaluate a communications piece. And as a result, whether it is a research paper or a communications piece, both have to stand the test of critical appraisal. And if you're able to make it part of our blood, then we'll be able to actually have impactful communication pieces. So now what we did, as I said, that we used the toolkit that was developed in Australia called the Media Doctor Toolkit, which was essentially about new drugs, new treatment, to actually, broad base it to not just research, treatment, drug stories, but health policy stories, health, public health stories, and health information stories. So those are the 4 toolkits: Tool 1, Tool 2, Tool 3, and Tool 4. Health news, health advice, health policy, and public health problem solutions. What I'll do is, I'll quickly run you through the toolkit, and then I'll share this over an email, Amanpreet, so that you can share with everyone. So this is the Media Doctor India toolbook. I mean, is this visible to all?
Yes.
Okay. So if you see, we actually have given examples of the use of these tools on different news articles here. I mean, so if you see, drinking during pregnancy exposes baby to 428 diseases. So again, what is it based on? What is the research? I mean, whether it is new or whether it is, if it's talking of drinking, so how has the benefits been, how has the harms been described, things like that. So we have a rating tool here. It's a scorecard. So what happens is a group methodology is sometimes, individual rating are prone to errors. So we have done a project with UNICEF evaluating media stories on immunization, routine immunization. And basically, I mean, 2 or 3 sets of independent evaluators, they take up the 10 questions and each one rates them on the scale of satisfactory or not satisfactory or not applicable. Sometimes they may be not applicable. And these questions, I mean, they are a set of 10 questions, may have to be tweaked in context. For mental health, probably, certain things are important, certain things are not important. For road safety, which we did, mental health also, I think, Amanpreet, we did develop a set of 10 questions, though we did not use it, but I think
Yeah.
we did develop.
Kannan, can I just request you for a small break? This request is coming from some of the faculty members.
Sure.
So I think 1.5 hours is already gone. So probably, what do you think would be an optimum break? 15 minutes, 20 minutes?
15 minutes is fine if it is fine with everyone, or 20 minutes if everyone prefers that.
15 minutes is good. We can take 15 minutes. I'm sure ±5 is Indian stretchable time. So that's our.
Okay, I'll just end saying that, I am not going to run through this MDI handbook, but I'll share it with you, Amanpreet, so that you can share with the participants, and many of you can try it out on media stories, and then, give us feedback in terms of its authenticity and relevance and validity. Okay, let's take a break now.
Okay, and so everyone, we are taking a 15 minutes break and we'll be back by 4:45. So see you soon.
I'm not able to screen share, Amanpreet.
1
Uh,
second.
yeah, I think HP is co-host now.
Yeah, you can now. Try doing it again, Kannan.
ठीक है, sure. So shall I go ahead?
Yes, Kannan.
Okay, as I said, we have 4 toolkits. So one toolkit for the research and breakthrough treatment stories that I just showed, and then one story on treatment, information advice related stories, where we thought that the story recommended seeing a doctor based on reliable evidence or accepted medical practice. These kind of stories appear a lot during different health days, whether it is mental health day or whether it is World Cancer Day. And so so these are the 10 point criteria that we have developed. Advice was clear and easily applied. Benefits were presented in a meaningful way. Potential harms were presented in a meaningful way. The availability and cost of the intervention were noted. No vested interest on part of the authors. No obvious advertising. Anecdotal evidence used appropriately, and no evidence of disease mongering. Now, so there is a health journalism professor based in UK. His name is John Lister. So he was involved with us in terms of developing health policy checklist. So top 10 questions for health policy. So does the story ask whether there's any concrete plan and time scale for implementation? Does it explain costs and identify funding? Does it question whether the policy is based on ideology addressing a genuine problem? Many times, new policies are announced, but they are like old wine in new bottle. So is it really new? Again, the same criteria, is it really new? Are the downsides of the policy explored? Are we just going hammer and tongs with the positive sides or the negative sides to it as well? Again, potential conflicts of interest. Again, if you see whether it is coming from official press release or it has been written exploring all sides. So you see the same toolkit has been customized for different kinds of health stories. Now, public health stories, is this a new problem or a solution? Is a solution to this problem discussed? Have alternate solutions been suggested? Is there evidence of disease mongering? Is objective evidence provided to support claims made? Are risks, benefits, and solution expressed in absolute rather than in relative terms? Are potential costs of the problems mentioned? Are the costs of the solution to the problem mentioned? Are the sources of information, potential conflicts of interest noted? And is the headline consistent with the content of the story? So here you have 2 criteria which is journalistic in nature. One of them definitely about the headline. So I encourage you, I'll share that Media Doctor toolkit. I'll encourage you to use these tools because once you start using these tools, you'll be able to make sense of the stories that we read every day, whether it is in newspapers or see on television, things like that. Now, what are the basic problems with health stories that appear in newspapers? I'll quickly run this through. Many of you would know this, but then again, this is to just convey our lack of engagement with journalists and communicators, as a result of which, what was shown on the first slide is what is emerging as the picture. Now, those combinations that we tried out may actually be one of these. Many times, research is talking of relative data, not absolute data. I mean, I can tell you, I mean, I faced a real challenge recently while writing a press release where, I mean, at the George Institute for Global Health, I mean, Amanpreet, this was before I was leaving, the last press release I wrote, we were doing a project on sepsis. And so they studied, about 500 participants across ICUs in India. I mean, about 12 to 13 ICUs, and found that, at least half of them, if not more, developed complications and with associated mortality. Okay. Now, 567 patients were studied, and more than half of them developed complications. Now, obviously, 567 is a very small sample, considering India's size. So, when I started using the critical appraisal skills principles, I was really skeptical about how I should be able to write this press release. But when I started wearing a journalistic hat, the headline was very obvious to me. 1 in 2 patients in ICUs across India suffer from sepsis. And that was my headline at the end of the day. That's not, I mean, how would you now say whether the story is, how authentic is the story? Because it is based on relative data of 567 people studied. But then the journalistic instinct 1 in 2. And if I were a reporter, you would have found this in a headline in the newspaper. And that's what usually happens. We play on relative data. I mean, I think you mentioned about this causal language to describe observational studies. Causation is not proved. There is, I mean, only after joining a public health research institute. I mean, I can't mention all those 9 criteria of causation, but this Bradford, I know that there's a Bradford Hill criteria. Okay. But then, I mean, do communicators know? Do journalists know? Do they care? I mean, for them, I mean, research is created equal, whether it's an observation study or whether it's a randomized controlled trial. Now, this is something that happens all the time. I mean, you are studying something which can cause, let's say, some problem to the heart, or you are studying blood pressure, let's say, and let's say there are certain drugs which are being used to cure blood pressure. When would you say that a new medical pill for heart attack has been found? Because BP is a surrogate marker for heart attack, right? But then if I write a new pill for heart attack found, I mean, everyone would be misled, but it happens all the time. Tyranny of the anecdote, many times, and I have done this myself. We document success stories, but we don't profile dropouts in research, in let us say the programs that we do, and sometimes anecdote does not reveal the real story. Again, I will draw from one of the studies done at the George, because I've seen this happening. They had a big project where we studied whether family givers can be caregivers in terms of stroke rehabilitation. So what they did was, where they trained family members, close family members of stroke survivors, to be caregivers at home. And this study was done on 1,200 patients across 12 medical centers in India. And I visited Ludhiana, I mean, where Christian Medical College is one of the organizations doing the study. In fact, Dr. Jairaj Pandian was the lead investigator of the study. And in one of the homes that I visited, I found that, the wife was ably supporting the stroke patient in terms of, the rehabilitation, and then the exercises that she has been taught, that she was trying to actually make her husband do. And it was very impressive. I mean, the anecdote by itself was very impressive. And similarly, I had a couple of anecdotes from other centers as well. But then the finding of the research was that, caregivers do not bring any additional benefit to hospital-based rehabilitation. Then they definitely benefit, but hospital-based rehabilitation is crucial. And over and above, you can add, rehabilitation by caregivers. It's fine, it may add to it, but you can't replace hospital-based rehabilitation of stroke survivors. That was a finding us, because they were actually wanting to bring down the cost of stroke rehabilitation, and also see whether, by training family, because WHO recommends community care. But then the findings of the research was totally different. And it's also in context, right? But in other countries, there might have been better results. But then the anecdote presented a completely different story. Now, what do I do as a communicator? Single source stories. Many times, stories are based on single source, and what we find is they are based on government sources. You'll have a minister quoted, you'll have a joint secretary or a researcher from an academic institute, government institute being quoted, private institutes. People from there, they unless they have that credibility, they are not quoted. And in any case, in any story, an independent voice doesn't come. And then, of course, the quality of evidence that being presented, journalists don't know how to actually, as I said, all research is created equal for them. So these are some of the major flaws. As a result, what happens is, we all know that science is work in progress, right? What is true today may be overthrown tomorrow. I know very, very established health journalists, they are frustrated by the fact that, what actually is true today is overthrown 2 years later. But that is science, right? It evolves. And so coming to terms with uncertainty in science is something that we have not been trained as communicators. So we end up exaggerating or emphasizing benefits, or ignoring or minimizing potential harms. Let me quickly go through now. So what happens is, we raise false expectations about drug doing wonders, when many times you find those adjectives, wonder drug, okay, miracle cure, phrases like these, they should be avoided if we are really care about authentic evidence-based communications. So as a result, unproven technologies which are very costly, we end up popularizing that among the people. Cost, as I said, this cost of a stent in AIIMS is 10 times lower than the cost of a stent in a private institution. But a private institution, a press conference, a doctor may hold a press conference, we just write about it without talking of the alternate treatments available, without talking of the costs available. Okay, and many times, we find phrases like the cost is much lower. But what is that lower cost? Somewhere the treatment will be 20 lakhs and this is 18 lakhs. So saying the cost is much lower doesn't serve any purpose. Again, benefits. Here, one of the things that I've learned from you people is statistical significance may not equal clinical significance. Okay. A research paper may prove something statistically, but probably it may not hold any clinical significance. So knowing these things are very important. Again, absolute versus relative data is very important. And then, personal stories overwhelm readers but do not promote critical thinking. So we need to be very careful with the use of anecdotes. Again, we need to be very, very harms or benefits have to be quantified. How much harm, common side effects, how much common side effects. One of the things which I am not very clear about, but then I know that people use the best statistical average that suits their treatment or their disease. I know that mean is used in certain cases, mode is used in certain cases, median is used in certain cases, and then when you are using the best statistical average to actually project a certain thing, even now I don't understand mean, mode, and median. How
So,
will I
Kannan, we have a question by Divya who's asking, I always wonder, do the journalists not have a review process before a press release?
See, I think, the journalism world is quite different from the academic world. They do have a review process, but the review process more is in the context of, how a story is written. And journalists are trained to write a story in a sensational manner. Okay. Now, I mean, as a journalist, as a communicator, I will not give up the principles of journalism. I still need to make it interesting. I still need to make it newsworthy. All I will do now is balance it with evidence-based health communication. Sometimes the balance may be affected and tilted more towards sensationalism. The difference being now that I know that I'm sensationalism. The earlier, what was happening is I was sensationalizing whether I knew it or not know it. So to answer your question, the review process that you find in journalism is quite different. I mean, we are talking of two different worlds here, bringing two different worlds together. And for that matter, let's talk of the review process in the academic world. I mean, even the review process in the academic world is fraught with a lot of errors. A lot of research wastage takes place. Okay, a lot of times the research itself that we are doing is based on the funding that is available, and therefore we are not actually taking up the real questions for research. And there's a lot. The Lancet did a series of public conferences on minimizing research waste. Okay, now why I don't understand research at all. How do you I mean expect me to understand research waste? And now when it comes to journalists, the review process that they go through is very interesting. They may take up a research paper and say that I don't understand a word of it. I mean, and at the end of the day, making the research paper interesting, or let's say, culling out the summary of a research paper, which is what, let us say, NHS advises to do. They have the simple way of communicating research paper or writing research summaries for lay audience. This is something which is very, very important from the research point of view. And since these kind of pieces don't go to journalists, the engagement with you see, how does a review process start? There are two kinds of review processes which have never met, right? One review process is journalistic process, which is more based on, let's say, the principles of journalism, principles of sensationalism. And the other review process, the academic review process, which is based on rigor. Now, standards of rigor are quite different in how well you write. It's about what are the golden quotes that you're able to bring. It's evidence-based health communications is something that enters the picture once journalists start understanding that evidence and science is very crucial. And then that review process is more informal now. I mean, you have health journalists who are worth their salt, who are able to write good evidence-based basis, but then it doesn't flow into an institutional mechanism for review. If you know what I mean, journalism by itself is a very informal kind of a setup, and as a result, there are journalists. I will not say that there are not health journalists who don't follow high standards of journalism and high standards of evidence-based health communication. There are journalists who understand a lot of things that we are talking about. But to say that, a review process in journalism should be based on a review process that's happening in academics, that will not happen. What has not happened is the marriage. The marriage has happened at the individual journalist level, but the marriage has not happened at the institutional level, because health journalism by itself is not given a lot of importance. So a lot of factors that go into these things. I mean, it's the answer is never simple. I know, I don't know whether I'm able to satisfy what you asked, but the answer is not simple.
Yeah, thank you. It was actually quite satisfactory, but I was also just wanted to add one point, because nowadays there are a lot of new areas emerging, and because people are more interested in exploring more career pathways, so there are a lot of researchers who are turning journalists, and there is this entire new field called science journalism, which is emerging now, which has a lot of scope. So I was just wondering, and these people, they write very good articles. They're very simplified versions of the research articles. And they're very
Sorry to interrupt.
highly
What was that term that you just said? Something journalist?
science journalism.
One more time?
Science, it's
Science
science
journalism.
journalism.
Think journalist. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So these people, they write very nice blogs and they write very nice articles which are based on the peer-reviewed research which is happening in the field. So I was just wondering, as a follow-up to what you just said, is in India also, do we have? I'm sure that we will have separate in journalism offices also. We will have separate departments, right? There are people who will be working in science. There will be people who will be working in government or Bollywood, or like there are different areas where different people work in, and they will have specific degrees relative to that. Is this not how it works? Because in order to write a science article, you really need to understand that research on which your article is based on. If you don't understand that, you have no right to communicate, in a very different way, the findings which were there in the article. So that actually, because sometimes these sort of articles do more harm than the good that they do.
Right.
So yeah, do we have like separate people, separate departments? How does it work? I was just curious.
So to answer your question, yes, in some newspapers and prominent television channels, we have science journalists and health journalists. Also, there are a lot of people who have become science journalists by virtue of their interest. So this is not promoted within the media. So if you say that, if every newspaper, every television channel has got a separate science department or health department, no. I mean, health is a beat. It's an important beat for reporters. And those reporters are new, so they are self-trained to actually understand health and science. And over a period of time, many have been qualified to become good science or health reporters. Now, having said that, what is the real challenge? Look at science journalism or health journalism as it happens in Western countries also. I mean, they will say that it's slow journalism in the sense that it's more feature articles. Okay, it's more like I actually tap into spaces where I can write a article doing my own investigation based on a series of unfolding news events or trends. But the damage is done in the news events. The damage is done in reporting the news events. So here is the base where science journalism or principles of science journalism has not percolated at all. Because simply because of the fact that journalism is a very unorganized industry. So again, it's not very simple. Every newspaper, every country has got very good science journalists, very good health journalists, and every country has got this kind of crap happening. I mean, every country has, every day you content with misleading headlines. And that is because, and I would say that only way to change it is to make critical appraisal, which is a simple tool, part of the daily routine in both journalism as well as in research. And if that happens, at least because there are a lot of, this is really vast. We can't go deep into it. But then how do you report a 300-word news story? Let's say, that we did this. Okay, we have let's say, in India, pentavalent vaccine was introduced by the government of India, and in Tamil Nadu, where it was introduced 4 to 5 years back, there was immediately some children were taken ill, both in Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and then children died. Okay, now the headline was "Children died due to pentavalent vaccine administration." What was the harm? Harm was the Tamil Nadu government withdrew the program. The Kerala government also withdrew the program. Now, you have science journalists who are analyzing it, okay, and reporting all sides, saying that immunization by itself is not leading to it. There may be, other conditions present in the children, and due to which the children fell ill. And there's this entire mechanism of adverse effects due to immunization. And then the reporting happens, and then the investigation is done. And after 1 month, the report is produced. We try to explain it to local journalists. And we also, and during the training programs, we looked at how we can make the headline sober, how we can make the writing sober, still, making it interesting enough for the reader. Because at the end of the day, journalism follows journalism. You have to interest the reader. Okay. I mean, if your reader does not read your story, then you're lost the reader there. And that is where they play with the headlines. And much of sensationalism occurs because negative news is more powerful than let's say positive news. I can't sensationalize a positive headline. Okay. I mean, what we told them is don't say due to immunization, at least change that. Okay. Or something like that. So what I'm and there are other things, I mean, how a journalism, how a media industry is organized. I mean, many people don't know that a journalist or a reporter reports, and then his copy is edited by another group of people sitting in an organization it's called the desk. It's called the editorial desk. And then there's another senior editorial person who gives the headline. So the reporter doesn't give the headline. And many times, the damage is done in the headline. The reporter may have done a good copy, but the headline may be completely misleading. But so then whom all you sensitize within an organization? It's not enough. I mean, we do media workshops. We call one reporter and sensitize him or her, but it's the entire industry that needs to be sensitized. It's different layers of let's say the process, editorial process, where the damage is done. So it's a very, very huge, complex problem that we are dealing with.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll quickly finish this and then we can have a discussion on this. So I think, you people are getting the idea, so I can share this presentation. So again, you're well aware of the confusion between causation and correlation and things like that. I mean, look at this. Look at articles in the Times of India. You will have a 3-column article about a very big breakthrough in research, and in the last line, it will be written the experiments conducted on mice. Now, we know that when an experiment is conducted on mice, it will take a lot of time before it is tested on human beings, and then it will take a lot of time before it actually sees the light of day. But then done, damage is done. I mean, animal studies are reported. I mean, see, all we need, critical evaluators who are able to actually. That is what was done through the media doctor experiment, where what they did was, they continuously kept a mechanism, but every day they actually went through media stories and then wrote to journalists, wrote to the newspapers saying that, this was the problem with the story, and we are writing this not to tell you that, the journalist has written it badly, but because, it's not based on real authentic science. So we need more dialoguing. So, they ran out of funds, and then in the US, Gary Schweitzer, who is a health journalism professor at I think University of Minnesota, he ran a website called Health News Review, and we actually did a conference in India inviting these people. But then unless it's an ongoing process, it doesn't yield much result, and you need funding to sustain anything, right? Now, this is it doesn't mean that, if let us say, number of people who drown by falling into a swimming pool correlates with number of films that a actress has been released. It doesn't mean one is causing the other. This is also obvious. Now, disease mongering, we all know what happened during Corona, what happened during Ebola. Okay. Look at the Corona situation last year. How much of, let's say, deaths because of lack of oxygen was being reported by the media. It was presenting a very scary picture. While at the same time, there were people who were getting cured. I'm not saying that, the public health system was not stressed. It was stressed. But you don't end up presenting a picture of balance, and that happens more in television debates also. See this this entire concept of, let us say, inviting a person who can speak for a topic and inviting a person who can speak against a topic on a debate involving science. It doesn't work. Science is science. You are for it or you're not for it. That's all. You can't be against it. But then intelligent television debates, they so-called, they will say that, invite one person who is for it, invite one person who is against it, and then have a good debate. And then you will have, let's say, people saying that immunization is very good, that's the best way to actually fight child mortality. You'll have another person saying that immunization is crap. There are people all over the world who are against vaccination for children, vaccination, immunization. But then how do you balance these perspectives? You can't balance. This is called, it's called false sense of balance. And there is no, you can't balance science with non-science. It doesn't work that way. It's another pitfall that happens in the media. Again, we have discussed this a lot, we should talk about alternative options. Look at the screening tests, for example. Are screening tests really needed for every medical condition these days? Every time you go to the hospital, first thing that's done is for you is have this done, X-ray done, MRI done, CT scan done. Again, the novelty. The more we read these stories in the media, the more we are able to use this criteria, we will realize, is it really new? It's a very deceptive statement. But then that involves a lot of knowledge, a lot of research into and what went before it. Okay, and then, let me give you my own example. I am a diabetic, and I have been prescribed all kinds of medicines, which costs rupees 400 to 500 a strip of 10 tablets. Call it Januvia. They are very common. People know it. Januvia, Janumet, things like that. And then 1 year later, 1 year before, I switched to metformin. Metformin is available for 30 rupees per strip of 10 tablets. And it has brought down my sugar levels like anything. Doctors don't prescribe metformin because it's a generic medicine. And then you have pharmaceutical companies coming and giving doctors, these expensive medicines, and they are given, let's say, some extra money to prescribe these medicines. So this cahoots that the medical doctors have with the pharmaceutical industry is really playing havoc. There is this guy in Australia. His name is Ray Moynihan. He has studied this phenomenon, and he's written a couple of books on this. How in fact, he has studied a lot of phenomenon, including this, this treatment for obesity and all those things, and this medicalization of, let us say, of fatness. Who is fat and who is not fat, and when should you be getting an intervention, when you should not be getting an intervention. So medicalization is happening these days, rapid, lot of health conditions are getting medicalized, and public is really getting, good into it. So how do we actually establish a mechanism by which, we stop this medicalization of normal health conditions? Next is the availability criterion. Is it really available? In India, it matters a lot that, a treatment is not just new, it is cost effective, but it should be readily available. And what is readily available and what is not readily available is again, look at, the screening for diabetes, hypertension. Only now it's percolated into rural areas. Now, in those contexts, if we talk of this digital therapeutics revolution that's happening in cities, a lot of people are going for it. And they're also trying to find out ways to take it to rural areas. But unless we find out a way of reaching tier 3, tier 4 rural cities, these new breakthroughs based on technology, based on telemedicine, based on medical therapeutics, will just remain, just ending up serving a few. Now, this is very important, sources of news. When you will read a news and you will find that ultimately, either a government source is being quoted. See, mostly it depends on the convenience of the person who's writing. I mean, many times, a lot of doctors, they are very good in PR, and they have established those relations. So any new development in let's say the stroke field, there are a couple of doctors, whom the journalist relies upon. Any new development in the heart cardiology field, there are a couple of private doctors the journalist relies upon. He or she just calls them and gets a quote and then writes the story. So basically, they are not trained to consult independent experts. And here is where again that entire science journalism versus science news comes in. See, there is no point, a science journalist, clarifying, confusion that has occurred around a series of news reports, let us say, around immunization, or around cervical cancer screening, or around a new drug for stroke or heart attack, because the story is written by a journalist, and the mechanisms are what? They are press releases, they are press conferences, and the private hospitals, they will immediately hold a press conference, and then three common. And many times there was a culture of giving gifts also. I'm sure it's happening even now. So the stories are reported. And now 10 days later, a science journalist comes and gives all sides of the story and writes it. Damage is already done. Now, many times the story relies on a news release, but the news release suffers from the same kind of flaws that a news report also suffers from. So what we have done is we have done a large number of trainings for journalists, for researchers, because at the end of the day, it is not about, let us say, journalists or communicators or researchers. It's about creating a cohort of people who are interested in evidence-based health communication. And what we have found through our experiments is public health students, okay, they are much more interested and in actually understanding both principles of communication and also principles of critical appraisal. And as a result, now, because there's a lot of scope for self-publishing. I'm actually contesting my own statement, or let's say contradicting my own statement, saying that damage is done in news reports, no doubt about it. But then the more alternate opinions you are able to bring through blogs, through these expert articles that science journalists do, through thought leadership articles, through social media, at least you'll be able to create a counterculture, right? Counterculture to let's say this confusion that persists in terms of news. Now, the other thing is, there is this entire thing on fake news on social media that goes on, and there are different types of information, misinformation and disinformation. Now, there is false connection happening, there is false context happening, there is manipulated content. False connection and false context happens because of ignorance. But manipulated content is a person knows that he or she is actually going to mislead. And this is also happening a lot. This happens because, even in scientific institutions, they have to put their best foot forward. And they will say, okay, a journalist is used to writing this kind of thing. So why share which stage the research is in now? Just do a press release. We want a name for an organization. And a lot of scientific institutions are hiring PR professionals to actually write press releases, which are not based on evidence-based health communications, which are exaggerating. And this is also happening. So there is this group called First Draft, which you could look it up. I'll share this presentation as well, which has developed a module on evaluating, social media, misinformation, disinformation. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. And so, what I'm essentially saying that, if you are able to actually combine critical appraisal skills and communication and writing techniques, then you will be able to actually start the process of evidence-based health communication. And the more people actually start doing evidence-based health communications, the more it is. And for this, it's important. So it's important to understand the first part of my presentation, because first part of my presentation is what communications people do. And the second part of my presentation is what it needs to actually go into communications without actually compromising the way communications is done, without compromising the way journalism is done. That is what a lot of science journalists are doing, and we must give some credit to these people. I mean, research, a lot of researchers, a lot of science journalists I have started doing this, but unless we take communication seriously, unless we take journalism seriously, all of us can self-publish, all of us can use social media, all of us can write for media, all of us can actually write thought, but then do we give importance to it? We don't. So one is the why and how of it, and the other is uh, mm, when and where. How do we do it? I mean, we are all busy in our own lives. Okay, I mean, we don't get time for research. How do you find time for writing? It doesn't happen. I mean, I have seen very good researchers, very good what do you call academicians, also being good communicators, and that is what essentially we need to understand and imbibe ourselves and also in our students. Be a good communicator from day one, and once you're able to understand communications, critical appraisal, you can actually put the two together to do evidence-based communication. And there, I mean, whether it is writing for media, keeping in mind the inverted pyramid, writing blogs and articles. I mean, we talked about the storytelling principles, so we need to keep those in mind, while at the same time, writing the articles with rigor. The anecdotes are needed, but they need to be in context. It's not easy. I mean, we can follow it up with a practice-based workshop, which is I think the critical. But unless we understand the theoretical base of it, we'll not be able to move towards the practice. And that is why I thought first let's I mean, lay the framework down. I mean, storytelling is not an easy job. There is a lot of conferences happen on storytelling, and every field talks about storytelling, whether it is fundraising, whether it is research, whether it is programs in the NGO world, whether it is a corporate sector. But unless we start practicing the storytelling, and for us, because we have to ultimately base ourselves on science, and therefore the critical appraisal part is equally important. And social media, again, quickly, I mean, Twitter, within 20-30 characters, I mean, there's a limit to the characters. You have to carry thought, but why, what do you link it to? Are you able to link it to an authentic source? Are you able to link it to something that can open the entire door for someone? So a tweet is by itself, is very easy. Everybody is tweeting, or a lot of people are not tweeting. But then structuring a tweet within a context, 10, I mean, about 40 to 45 characters, and then, a link. And that is where, the magic is done, link, link to authentic sources, link to very good blogs, a link to, good work that's happening. Same thing with Facebook. The difference between Twitter and Facebook is Twitter is more like a thought. It's a vehicle to carry your thoughts, whereas Facebook, it's more like sharing information. Thought leadership articles, again, I mean, this is a area where academicians can actually lead, because they are into the thought leadership space, but you need to understand the principles of communication, and then marry it with critical appraisal, and use the storytelling principles, use the inverted pyramid, and also base it on science. I mean, ultimately, when we say critical appraisal, it is nothing but base it on science. And these days, self-publishing is a big option that has emerged. We have Medium, we have many other blogs that are published, WordPress. So we should get into a habit of writing, habit of communicating. Much of the damage, if you ask me, has been done is because, we have left it to, let's say, a set of professionals who work very differently than us. Okay. If I had not interacted with you people over a period of 5 to 6 years, if I have not interacted with the academic world, I would not have been speaking like this. Because as a journalist, I was speaking something else. I was actually writing something else. But then, because we were wanting to write something which is authentic, which is substantial. So we have been interacting with the people who are generating science, or who are, let's say, doing some authentic work, and that is how then I became interested in science journalism and wrote science articles, and that's what happens with a lot of science journalists. It's not organized. Okay, it's out of interest, and as you Divya, I think you said, right, and anybody can become a good science journalist, and anybody can actually become a good critical appraisal, critical appraiser. So I think this is what I wanted to say to start with, that we should get in the habit of communicating, habit of, let us say, talking about our work, and while doing so, we need to understand some simple techniques of communications, use the critical appraisal skills, and understand how to base communications on science and evidence. And then once we are able to do this, build a practice based on that, then what will happen is we will not only be good academicians, we'll also be good communicators, and it will stand all of us in good stead if we are doing authentic and genuine research, and we're also able to talk about it authentically and genuinely. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Kannan. We have one comment and one question. The comment is by Divya. She's saying, would be great if peer-reviewed journals can directly collaborate with journalism people. It would be much simpler world then. And we have the question by Prama. If you remember, we would not able to hear her. She's writing, trustworthiness of qualitative research is often questioned by the research world. Positivist researchers do not consider it as scientific. How do you explain the power of storytelling or the value of the human face to them?
See, qualitative research, if I understand it correctly, it's also based on stories, right, at the end of the day, right? So I think at the end of the day, it's about selecting the right story and balancing it with data and anecdotes. Now, I don't know much about how qualitative research is done, but let's say qualitative research leads to a series of insights based on people's voices, supporting the original research question, which is being done through a quantitative method. I'm putting it very simply, right? If this is what is the purpose of qualitative research. Now, at the end of the day, let's say we are talking of building perspectives, right? And for building perspectives, we are analyzing and saying that these are the 3 or 4 areas where the research is trying to take the science forward. And then once we've selected those 3 or 4 areas, you find the right, let's say, anecdotal evidence or a qualitative research story to actually substantiate it, and then build it together, not just weave it, not just based on the voices, but then bring everything together. So while I'm answering your question, I'm getting this idea, probably a story based just on qualitative research may not work. You need to bring the data and the results together, Because if I understand Amanpreet correctly, quantitative and qualitative research go together, right?
Yeah.
And so while qualitative research or qualitative research is essentially stories, right?
Um,
Not necessarily only stories. There can be various, like you can use secondary data, you can use participant observation, a lot of, like, anything that is not number.
But
So,
everything is a quote, right? Everything, there's a face behind it.
yes.
There's a face behind it. And at the end of the day, it's about balancing the face with the data, right?
The face is the data here. So in qualitative research, we are not crunching numbers. We are valuing the lived experiences or the human experiences, the phenomena over the number. So that is where the scientificity of qualitative research is questioned by the quantitative researchers per se.
No, I think you are talking of the debate between quantitative and qualitative research, okay? Which is not, which is outside the purview of what I am talking about. But I can definitely tell you that as a journalist, as a
Kannan,
communications person,
can I?
I will give more importance to the lived experience than to the data, because data by itself doesn't mean anything to me unless you are able to substantiate it with lived experience.
Right.
And you will, I mean, if let us say you are doing a breakthrough research, okay, and then you also have documented lived experience. Now for me, that press conference where the academician is talking about, let's say, the research report, but does not have two people, okay, two people with lived experience coming and talking about it, and for me, it holds no value. For me, the two people who are coming and talking about the the impact it has had on them is more important. And of course, I mean, going by principles of critical appraisal, I will say whether the data is matching the. So for me, if you ask me, the lived experience, the human interest stories, the case studies are more important. The only thing now is that, as a journalistic communications professional, I know that, the lived experience cannot run ahead of the data, basically. It needs to actually substantiate the data, and so therefore the probably, there may be so many quotes, so many, let's say, lived experiences, so many observations, but selecting the right one which can back your data. So for me, quantitative research by itself has no meaning. I'm talking of a communications person,
right?
Okay? And qualitative research by itself has no meaning. Only when the two come together and come together in an appropriate manner, that something of value can be shared.
Sure. Thank you for your response.
Okay. Kannan, can I please ask you to stop sharing the screen?
Sure.
Some of us are trying to take the screenshot of this. We would have loved it if this was in person, but we would have had a group picture. But in an online mode, we can only click the screenshots. So I would request everybody to please switch on the videos if you can, so that we can take a, relatively, I could say, I'll use that word relative, the group picture. Sindhura and Sudarshan and whoever can click the pictures, please do so, because I can only see 4 people here on my screen. Okay, so any questions?
Or feedback, because this was very theoretical, and usually I mean the media doctor workshop that we have done was based more on actual hands-on analysis of media reports or press releases, or let's say the research papers, the abstracts, which I mean, one of the reasons why I left it out here is also because of the location from where I'm speaking about, where I have very limited connectivity to put together a presentation based on activities. But definitely,
So Kannan, we can just probably do it at the end. Professor Derek has to leave for an urgent thing. So I would request Professor Derek to just give the vote of thanks.
So I think before I hand it over to Professor Derek, I would like to display a small token of appreciation and gratitude that JGU will be Jindal Global University will be sending out to you the post. So this is, if you can see, this is a shawl where your name has been engraved, and there is a pen also that will be sent to you over post. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Professor.
Great. Thank you, Sudarshan. And thank you, Mr. Krishnaswamy. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today. I wish we could have done this in person. I mean, it was a fascinating discussion, but of course, I think that kind of face-to-face interaction always promotes a little more interactivity. And certainly we would have gotten more faces to see rather than what we have at the moment. But we really appreciate you taking the time. I think it's clear listening that you have so much different experience, both in journalism with respect to publishing and so on and so forth. So again, I think everyone found it valuable to get some insight in terms of how we can really kind of punch up our writing and ensure that we're communicating in the most efficacious way, both in terms of the content, but also to, actually engage the reader. They have to want to read it in order to invest that time and effort. So once again, I really want to thank you for taking the time for joining us. It was very insightful.
Thank you, Professor Derek, for those kind words. I look forward to more such engagement in the future.
Absolutely. And we'll stick our memorabilia in a box, and hopefully you'll have it within a couple of days. So, and maybe at some point in the future, we can have you come up on campus and actually visit in person.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
All right.
I'm on.
Thank you all. And I'm sorry to run. I got to deal with the student issue. So have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Yeah, so Kannan, you were asking for the feedback. So yeah, we can just ask if anybody has any comment to make, any feedback, any question towards the end, and then we'll wind it up. Okay, so Professor Manjushri is saying, Kannan, that thank you so much for a wonderful talk, Mr. Krishnaswamy.
I think Kannan, I would possibly build on what you said. I was, having something hands-on will be great. Just even showing a documentation with someone, a report someone has written with no idea about critical appraisal, and then a revised report which has critical appraisal skills incorporated into it. So just would really had made things a little more tangible. I really heard the theory, and it was good to know some of the common errors which we all do, but at some point we're struggling slightly to connect where should I now go from this direction. So we really hope we get to read a little more, or if you have some sample articles where you have worked in, if you can share that with us, that would be great.
I'll do that, Kanika. I have some sample articles, so along with the media doctor toolkit, I'll send you some of the sample articles as well.
Okay, and Professor Divya has said, wonderful talk, thank you. Any last comments, feedback? Yeah, so one more comment, a sample article with quotes and infographics will be useful. Okay, so Professor Nitya is saying, thank you so much. So Darshan, do you want to say something?
Thank you so much, Mr. Kannan, for this talk. And I think as academicians, we have to bridge the gap between the what is happening in the field and what is happening in the academics, and communicate with the larger audience, which many of us may not be doing, because many of us may not be able to read what we are writing in the journals. And it becomes very important, particularly in social sciences like psychology, to reach out to a larger audience. And I also feel that in vernacular languages, so that the lay persons will also get to read what we are doing. So thanks a lot, and look forward to meeting you here or somewhere else anytime. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Kannan, for your time and for all the insights. And I thank all the faculty members here for your time as well. So thank you so much.